Okay, well, welcome one and all to session 3. And just a word from the sponsors, King's College, Seminary President, Dr. Michael Wieteska, and Dean of the Graduate School, Dr. Preecha Jengjalern, and myself, the head of college, Gerard, Seow. So just a little bit of introduction. We are super glad to be able to present this from our base camp in Jengjalern at a time of great transition for many in the body of Christ. It is not an era of change, but a change of era, as the famous Pope once noted. The way God has led us thus far is testimony of this. Everything has changed, and yet nothing has changed. So the change is, quote unquote, discontinuous, as Alan Roxburgh has observed. The pandemic has forced the distinction between what is superfluous in church life and what is necessary and essential in the ecclesia, between what is elemental in your gift and what is consequential to your call. When big science closed us down during the contagion of 2020, the church went underground for a season. It was also during these short few months, much of the ecclesia made the switch to online platforms. What was residential, in person, face-to-face, migrated over to Zoom and other e-learning instruments. This morphology repurposed church property. The sanctuary became a recording studio, the foyer, a production room, when the physical building was shuttered. There has been 3 observable kingdom shifts, a generational shift, a corporate shift, and a narrative shift. The first is a generational shift. As Badgett put it succinctly, quote, one generation succeeds another almost silently. At every moment, men of all ages between 30 and 70 have considerable influence. Each year removes many old men, makes all others older, and brings in many new, unquote. What is true in politics is likewise true of the ecclesia. A line was drawn in the sand, and Moses climbed Mount Pisgah for the last time. Whether embraced reluctantly or not, whether the old gods saw it coming or not, whether the next generation was ready for it or not, the changes came in like a flood, and a new standard was lifted up. This was what the Spirit was saying all along to the churches, but very few were hearing it or misinterpreting the prophecy of this change of era. The second shift was a corporate shift. And by corporate, I mean in the dental sense. The new tooth arrives and everything changes accordingly. Everything adjusts accordingly. The new has come and sets aside the old for something better, more dignified and efficient. Analogous to orthodontics, the whole mouth has to be straightened, not only just 1 or 2 teeth. Before the pivot, 1 or 2 leaders were at the helm, steering the whole ship, right? After the pivot, an entirely new expectation surfaced in the body, a desire for self-organized leadership, and a new ecosystem that nurtured missional imagination in every member, and not just those at the top. The third shift I saw was a narrative shift, walking in the reality of the story God is telling above and beyond the local context, changing our appetite for all things local to all things kingdom, a de-emphasis on the denominational structure to elite ministry bubbles that make an impact as salt and light. Those that recognized the shift stopped counting apple seeds and started imagining possibilities in each seed. The narrative of the bigger, the better morphed into a focus on individual giftedness within the context of community flourishing. In short, every soul is ordained for greatness, and every community can bless God and flourish. Okay, so let's jump right into today's session, which is session number 3. in our Modalities for Life series. And this is a new series for the at both the undergraduate and the graduate level, both at the college and the seminary. So this is a mandatory series for all matriculating students. All right, so as we mentioned before, there are about 7 or 7 plus 1 different sort of camps where we want to set up shop and discuss certain issues. And today we're looking at discovery diagnostic in session 3. The word discovery diagnostic is a kind of a sort of a label for the one-on-one sessions that we do with you. When you have collected all your data, we're going to show you how to collect the data. The first piece that we want you to write out is talking about your life. So there's sort of 3 circles here: the life circle, the impact circle, and the coaching circle. The coaching is the one-on-one sessions. Okay, so for the life session, we want to look at your history before puberty, generally from around from birth time, whatever you can gather from your mother and your parents, your grandparents, and so on and so forth, your brothers and sisters, people close to you. What happened when you were younger, all the way to about 13 or so? And we call this storyboarding. Imagine if we're making a movie about the early part of your life. And then trying to connect that with the different seasons of life that you've been going through. So obviously, if you have, if you're in your 70s or 80s or 90s, in fact, we're going to look at a lady who actually died when she was 91. So obviously, if you have more life, then you have more to write down. But the focus probably will be in looking at the key movements or the kairos moments, if you like, within the whole course of your life. And these kairos moments could be understood as either flash points or indeed freeze points. This is the terminology of Robert Clinton in his book, Making of a Leader. So he talks about flash points, like imagine something blowing up, something exploding. I'll give you an example of that in World War II, right, in the case of Corrie ten Boom. But then there are also freeze points, times when everything shuts down and we don't understand what's going on. So you have sort of shock, and you have trauma. So the shock is the immediate, that kind of thing. And then the trauma is played out over days, weeks, months, could be even years. It could be childhood trauma. It could be work-related trauma, or trauma in the marriage, or trauma with children, or trauma, spiritual crisis of some sort, or midlife crisis, or whatever that the different cards you're dealt with in life, right? There doesn't seem to be any intelligence behind the things that we suffer. But, well, if you zoom out and you look back on these things, you realize, oh, okay, now I understand why I hit that iceberg. Or, it could have been human error. It could have been, error in your judgment, whatever it is. But things happen. And so this is life. This is what makes up your story or your history. Actually, your story is actually his story, right, in your life. But it takes eyes to see this. Okay, so the diagnostic, or the ability to see a meta narrative or a grand narrative that stitches all the different episodes in your life together, that's going to help you to see patterns. That's why it's called discovery diagnostics. We're hoping that it's not just writing your autobiography and publishing it. That we're not interested in that alone, although this could be the beginning of an autobiography of some sort, or a chapter within your life story. But what we're looking for are patterns, and that's that pattern that would diagnose something that has been put there from your mother's womb. So we've been talking about in the past 2 sessions the elemental you. We've been trying to parse or make a distinction between what is elemental to your soul, and what is consequential to your calling. Of course, the gift and the calling, both of them are irrevocable. But in order to understand that, we need to make some finer distinctions. In terms of an example that I can give you, in terms of autobiography, or what we call self-authored narrative, we can look at the famous life of Corrie ten Boom. The ten Boom family went through quite a number of kairos moments that actually began 100 years before, or at least 50 years before the outbreak of the World War. It actually began before Corrie was even born, in her father and her grandfather's life, who for some odd reason, some say it's the divine plan of God, their life, their work, the way in which they saw the world was in the context of a promise that was given to the Jews. They were not Jews, but they were Gentile believers, but they believed, they were Zionists. They believed in the heart of hearts that one day God would restore the land that was taken away by the Romans, and 2,000 years ago, and that one day that day had come. And so they had begun to pray for Israel, and they began a weekly prayer meeting for Israel. And so, of course, Corrie and the sisters, and that's a picture of them, black and white picture of them with the father. That whole context, that whole faith-based family background impacted Corrie even before she was born, or as she was growing up. And so you can see her family roots going back to 1844, her 50, 60 years before she's even born. The grandfather, the ten Boom family, they were very famous watchmakers in Amsterdam. And if you go to Amsterdam today, you can actually visit the ten Boom house where all this was happening. In fact, they made a movie called The Hiding Place about this whole story. If you map it out on a piece of paper and you look at the family roots, brother and sister, you look at the pre-war days, the gathering clouds that were, the clouds of judgment upon Germany, upon Europe in general, and then of course the maniacal dictatorship, what became a dictatorship or tyrannical rule of one person, one man, right? And so, put aside Hitler's personal journey, that's maybe for another day. But just looking at the wider, the complex context of World War II, then inserted into that context is Holland and the pre-war Holland and what was happening in their neighboring state, which was Germany and Austria and so on and so forth. So it all came to a head when war broke out in 1940. So you got to remember that this family had been actually praying for the revival of Israel as a nation, going back, 40, 50 years. Every week, it was one of the continuous prayer meetings that went on every week at the Ten Boom house. So it was not really an entire surprise that when the rubber hit the road, the Ten Boom leadership, the family leadership, the leadership within that mini ecclesia, if you like, of the Ten Boom family, made the decision to hide Jews. It was a decision based on conscience and conviction to actually stand against the tyrannical dictates that was coming out from the socialist Nazi party at the time. So it was endangering them, their business, through their association, not only the close association with the Jews, but they were actually doing something that was illegal at the time, but it was not illegitimate. It was entirely legitimate, but it was illegal. Now, I hope you catch that. That is a key idea there, that sometimes you're put in a situation where you do things that are illegal, but they're entirely legitimate. Why? Why do you do that? Because of your conscience. And it's your conscience, as what Martin Luther King Jr., the Black civil rights leader, said. It's the conscience, your personal conscience, that speaks to the freedoms of society. Okay? It speaks to the freedoms in society. Okay, so let's, I want you to sit back and, grab a cup of coffee and, just, just enjoy yourself as you listen to this story. Think about this story. It's actually a movie. They made it into a movie called The Hiding Place. If you were to take the whole of Corrie Ten Boom's life, and of course she had died when she was 91, right? So she had a lot to put into, a lot to be grateful of in the different seasons of her life. She went through the different seasons, is what Solomon talks about: the season of discovery, the season of service, the season of learning, the season of enabling others, the season of restructuring, the season of leadership, and the season of compassion. Well, she had all 7 shoes. She had to wear the different shoes in different contexts, right? In the concentration camp where she was sent, and then she survived. And, when her sister and her mother didn't survive, her parents didn't survive, but she survived. And she was given the privilege to tell the story to subsequent generations. And so she is honored by the Israeli state as one of the righteous among the Gentiles. And she's given a place in the modern Israeli history, state history. As such, you can read her story. That's where I picked it up at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, which is the Holocaust memorial, sort of a museum place which captures all this information, and not just about Corrie Ten Boom. There were many people who were in the same spirit of Zionism and protecting God's property, basically the vision, and bending their necks under the yoke of Christ. And remember, Christ said, "My yoke is easy, my burden is light." So I think once we look at the whole of your life, it's it's a time where you can take stock or take inventory on the things that have happened and the sequence of events in your life. When this really helps you to look at the flashpoints and the freeze points. It helps you to come to answer two very important questions in your life if you survive. I mean, as they say, whatever doesn't kill you will make you stronger. So I'm assuming that if you're listening to me now, you survive. You're a survivor. Okay, you're a fighter. So, but the two questions is, what makes life worth living? That's the first question you need to ask. It's actually a secular question. You need to, as the Bible says, be able to give an answer for the hope of your calling. But I mean, you translate that to everyday language. It's basically, what makes life worth living for you? I mean, why do you get up in the morning, right? And the second question is, why is tomorrow better than yesterday? I think that second question is really a mental health question. It's a kind of a checkup for you as to, if you have no reason to live, then, why are you even taking up, space, right? But if you can take stock and evaluate and look at the whole of your life, then it might help you to chart a way forward. It definitely will help you to chart a way forward if it's done in the honesty and with the intention to seek a way forward out of the ruts and the sort of the traps and the cul-de-sacs that sometimes we find ourselves in. So that's the idea, the general idea behind this self-authored, biography of yourself, an autobiography. That's one of the documents, one of the pieces that you'll need to actually take time and write down. It might, you might give a draft in the first 10, 15 minutes, but then it might take a couple of days or maybe even 2 or 3 weeks for you to actually put something down on a piece of paper. I mean, if you're a point, bullet point person, then of course just jot them down, maybe 10 or 12 different points, pivotal turning points, right, in your life story, and try to remember them. You can ask the Holy Spirit give you some recall, or you might get a dream, or you might, you might get some guidance on, what happened when you were a young person. It's super important for that. Okay, so now when you look, for example, let's take 2 or 3 examples in the Bible. Okay, let's go to this prophet guy. All right, he's known as the prophet Hosea, and when you read the story, it's kind of difficult to see how a prophet could actually marry this woman of ill repute. He was actually commanded to marry her. And, when you do the heuristics of diagnostics, right? I mean, that means heuristics means you're not sure you can't be sure, because obviously you can't go and interview, Gomer and Hosea and, do the diagnostics with him, all right, the one-on-one with him. But you have to kind of take a step back and think and approach it, discreetly, and think about it. Out of the 7 modal excellences, right? Prophetia, diaconia, didasko, parkleo, metadidomi, proistomy, or elios. Which one is the most likely for him to have that at the core, his elemental core? Well, a lot of people might say that he was kind of a rescuer, something like a King David kind of a figure, right? And David was a rescuer as well. We'll talk about David in just a minute. Could he be more of an eleemosynary figure? But then his hat, the hat that he wore, was that of a prophet, in terms of the 5-fold ministry or 4-fold ministry: prophet, apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, teacher, kind of thing. Could he have had that that prophetic voice that was, or the shoes of the prophet that he wore in this particular set of circumstances where he was to be a sign and a symbol for Israel by marrying this prostituted person. All right. So we can't be dogmatic here, but we can look at history. We can look at examples, case studies from the Bible, and we could derive a theory or heuristics that would be a sort of an educated guess about the elemental gift of Hosea as an Elias, and then his consequential shoes or hat that he had to wear as a prophet. Okay, let's take a look at another case here in point. So you have several personalities at play in the story of Esther, right? So you've got Mordecai. You've got to sort of account for Mordecai. You can account, obviously, the king, Xerxes or Ahasuerus, depending on how he is labeled in what language. So you have also this beautiful queen who deposes the previous queen, Vashti, right? You remember the story, and she sort of saves. She saves the day through a kind of obedience, isn't it? A kind of obedience. So you're looking at someone who had a sort of an kind of an iconic figure about her. Could she, in her beauty, in her gait, in the way she walked, the way she carried herself, her deportment, could she have possibly been a diaconia, for example? Someone who, follows the plan, doesn't ask questions so much. They just execute on what is required. And of course, she has to consider, because her life is at stake, right? So, but the fact is, she did execute on a plan that wasn't hers. The plan was coming from Mordecai, actually. So, that tells you something, that may tell you something about Mordecai being able to lead the team to success or to victory, right? And his team member, the one that is on his team, is Esther. You have different sort of heuristics at play here when you look at, for example, two other ladies come to mind. Rebecca is, another example where she, waters the 10 camels, and, she sort of executes a plan, somebody else's plan. That's really what the genius of the diaconia is all about. It's this service excellence that caught the eye of Eliezer, the servant of Abraham. Remember, he came with 10 camels and he left with a bride for Isaac, right? So these stories have a ring of truth to them simply because they describe things that are we recognize as truth. They're not fantastic stories of perfect people, but they're down-to-earth stories that are entirely relatable. The other lady that you think of is Ruth, in the Moabitess, the outcast, the person on the outside who becomes a person of significance on the inside. She's kind of the she's someone detestable from a pagan background, a background of pagan practices, idolatry, and so on and so forth, outside of the land of Israel, right? But she's brought in because of her quality, of her faith, of her service, right? So she gleans at the field of Boaz. And Boaz himself plays that very quiet, reforming, sort of owl-like, sort of wise statesman, elder statesman figure, right? He must have been quite an elderly person by the time we get to the threshing floor, where Ruth asks for a corner of his blanket, right? And to come under the wings of refuge of Boaz, right? So Boaz plays this, could it be a metonymic role, a wealthy landowner, a wealth creator, somebody who, puts up the umbrella over Naomi and Ruth and extends the line of Elimelech, the widow, the man who the husband of Naomi who died together with the two sons in Moab, right? So when you look at the different portraits or thumbnail sketches, if you like, in the scripture, you find that these characters are actually quite conforming to a repeatable pattern, a pattern that repeats in history over and over again, right? And we're not talking here about like 200 or 300 archetypes. We're just talking about 7 archetypes. And we'll go through them through the character study. Okay, here's something. Here's another kind of a heuristic for you, right? What about Joshua? What was his modal excellence? Here, Israel had been in the wilderness. I mean, he grew up under the cloud and by day and the fire by night. He grew up under the leadership of Moses. Moses was not allowed. He had to go up to Mount Pisgah and just see the promised land. He wasn't allowed to enter in. So what took Moses an entire generation, like 40 years or so, right? Building the tabernacle, going around here and there, all over the desert, establishing the rule, the canon of Mosaic law, and so on and so forth. Yet, Joshua, he does it, right? What Moses had to go through 40 years, he goes through in like a day. All of Israel, all the next generation, the next gen, right, of Israel pass through. The millennials go through, and none of the old God get to go through. It's kind of like a serious a sifting process, like flour that goes through the sieve. Not everything gets through, and only Joshua and Caleb belong to the other generation. So he's kind of a very special figure. It's not about his youth, because obviously Caleb was also an aged person, so-called in terms of years or number. And so he gets to go in and lead the troops and claim his mountain as well as a senior. But here, this Joshua, he leads Israel's troops, and he goes through war after war. So he's kind of like a champion, a fighter. Could he have been some kind of a pro-Islamic genius who would be able to restore the different heads of households within the wider body, the ecclesia? Could he be seen as being able to commandeer the resources of Israel toward a mission of driving out the enemies of God and bringing judgment upon the 7 nations? Could we see him in that role as a fighter, as a champion of some sort? Having to make tough decisions as leaders do in the case of AI, and being very careful to follow the instructions of the Lord? What does that speak to you? As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. What kind of sort of character traits do you see in this guy, Joshua, especially at the destruction of at Jericho? Okay, so lots of questions that we have, and so let's take a look at these 7 figures one by one, and it's a case of heuristics, because we don't get a chance to interview any of them, right? So let's go to Joseph first. All right, now in the case of Joseph, students of modalities, they are split into 2 camps. All right. Many of them see Joseph elementally as a prophet because of his dreams and the visions that he had. There's another school of thought that sees Joseph more elementally as a metadidomi because of the way that he was able to conserve and build all those granaries and so on and so forth. For the purpose of this study, I've just put Joseph in with the prophetia for the reason that he saw things and he was given to see the solution, right, of the 7-year famine. And in that sense, once he sees, he's able to lead. So the proclivity of the prophetia is one of discovery. It is one of being able to connect the dots and acting on almost like inside information that he knew, that nobody in the nation knew because of the dreams. He saw it. He saw it first. He devised his plan according to what he saw. And in some sense, there was this gift of the eye. A little bit different from Eliezer, we mentioned just now in the story of the finding of the bride for Isaac. This second character there in the blue box there under serve. Now, I'm following the progression that we find in Romans 12, 6, 7, and 8. Remember, there's at least 2 progressions, if not more. There's another progression that follows the tabernacle sequencing, the pattern that was shown to Moses on the mountain. But this one is, it's in a different sequence from what Moses saw, but it nevertheless contains all the same the content, but rearranged differently here in when you get to the book of Romans. So I'm using the Roman sequence here. The second, so after prophetia comes diaconia, right? So could it be that Eliezer is this sort of very, very faithful servant of Abraham who executes? He is a warrior. He is a soldier. He is also has to be a diplomat. He also has to be an event sort of a organizer because he has to organize. He has to be aware of his duty to follow the plan, to stick to the plan, the script, and the score. It was given to him to go and find a bride for Isaac. He couldn't be distracted. He was 100% focused on that. You'll find the diaconic genius to be very focused with this laser beam kind of focus on the plan and on the execution of the plan. And he did it perfectly. I mean, in just one chapter, chapter 24, I think it is in Genesis, start to finish, from ground zero to cap and gown. I mean, he completed his task given to him, and he checked off all the boxes, and he did it with in an uncomplicated and a very sort of artisanal way. Okay, so that's Eliezer. Could he be a diaconia? Okay, so again, we can't go and interview these guys, but we can look at the evidence and make up our own mind. All right, next one, we look at the third box, this orange color box there. So you've got this guy called Moses. Now, in the Charlton Heston portrayal, Cecil B. DeMille portrayal of Moses in the Ten Commandments, right, played by Charlton Heston, he's got this great big stick, and you know the beard, the white beard, and very authoritative. But is it really that he was a leader, you know, a prostemic leader? If you look a little bit closer at some of the sort of kairos moments that were presented to Moses, you find he wasn't much of a leader at all. Remember Kadesh Barnea, you know, he takes the vote. I mean, what's that, right? I mean, if he really was a pro-istemy, he would have said, okay, boys, follow me. Draw your swords, follow me. We're going into the promised land. And then that's it. They would have crossed into the promised land, just like that, right? But instead, he takes a vote. And that's really weird. He shares his power with others. That's not very leader-like. I wonder why. Okay. Then you look at his writings. Go to Deuteronomy, go to Leviticus. I know that yes, you know, it was God that showed him the sort of the pattern for all these things, the pattern in the tabernacle and so on and so on. But it must have taken a kind of a comprehensiveness and a sort of a encyclopedic mind to remember all those things. I mean, we didn't have computers and, you know, that sort of thing, recording machines back then. So he must have been some kind of a super organized in his mind, in his brain, you know, kind of a classification nut or a nerd. Okay, today we call them nerds. To be able to remember all those things, categorize everything from A to Z, and to know everything front and backwards and how to spell everything and all that new vocabulary. Amazing guy. Kind of, you know, when you look at the Ten Commandments, when you see the order, when you see the impact of the 613 laws, when you see the way that he wrote the laws, and then the laws took on a life of its own in the community and created this sort of rather esoteric, sort of orthodox kind of cloister in the desert, you know, and the preparation of the tribes and the division of the leaders. You kind of realize that everything was coded. Everything was, it wasn't haphazard. It wasn't fluid or plastic. It was a mold. It was like, you know, those, you know, when you're making fiberglass boats, you need to have like a steel mold. The mold is important because everything follows after a mold or a pattern. So you kind of get the idea, and you ask yourself, could it be that Moses was really like more like a didactic, a didasco, and his elemental was more of teaching? But of course, he had to wear the shoes or the hat of the leader, and to lead Israel through the wilderness, it was not easy. But remember, every time he brought his didactic gift to God, you know, he raised his hands to the Lord. It was like kind of, you know, God redeemed, and it was actually God doing the fighting for him. So there are some lessons to be learned there about, you know, conquering the land or possessing the land, something like that, and where God is really at the center of it all. Okay, the fourth modal excellence is what we look at is that of the paracollectic genius, the green one there. And you see a kind of I don't know who did all these pictures, but anyway, they kind of, he don't know whether this is really Abraham, but to me, it kind of looks like an Abrahamic figure. Okay. So I just chose them from the internet, I think, but he looks kind of Abrahamic, and he kind of has a kind face. He kind of has a sort of a fatherly, sort of inclusive, eclectic look about him, like a counselor of some sort. I don't know. Anyway, I mean, he had his own sort of elite troop forces. He had his his own troops under him. That's how he was able to win back. He conducted wars and stuff, but he was also very inclusive, and he was good at negotiating. One of the things that strikes you about this Abraham figure, besides the fact that he is his servant, he's got loyalists surrounding him. I mean, look how loyal Eliezer was to Abraham, right? His master. I mean, doesn't that tell you something about the paracletic gift and the ability to bond? And, he's kind of like the bonding chairman of the Old Testament. And he is not afraid. He has this gift of the gab, right? His tongue gift. He's able to even, talk with God and negotiate and sit down at the table with God. God and man at tables are sat down, and he starts at 45, I think, or 40, or and then he goes down 30, and he keeps negotiating down until 10, and then of course finally he says, "Look, God, if there were 10, how about if there was 10 righteous people in Sodom? Would you destroy the city?" And of course, the answer was, even if there was one soul, one righteous soul in the city, it would be worthwhile to spare that city. The fact is, right, actually, there was one who was righteous. It wasn't Lot. It was Abraham himself. You see, the intercession, the negotiation that you see, the verbal negotiation that you see Abraham, it tells you that Abraham really was very well adjusted. He was not lacking in any sense. He knew who he was. He was that righteous person that would save the city. And the moment he left the city, he went in, he grabbed, he had the inside information. God was going to judge that city. And he grabbed Lot. And Lot acted by faith to get out of that place. So you see, the faith of Abraham, the righteous man, that one righteous man transferred over to Lot. And Lot, through action, took action. And as they say, regeneration precedes revival. And so it was God's doing, or God's initiative, right? Where I'm getting that phrase is from the Reformation theologians, right? From Calvin onwards. They said that regeneration precedes faith. It wasn't the faith of Abraham or the faith of Lot that saved them. It was actually the decision or the initiative for God to spare Lot and his whole family, actually. Unfortunately, not all the members of the family were saved. And so we know that was not a righteous family because of what happened to the mother, and then also what happened to the daughters of Lot. So nevertheless, the impact of Abraham was as a scaffold to Lot, and as an encouragement, an encourager, an exhorter, or as an enabler that enabled the story to continue. Okay, so the next figure we have is Boaz in the pink box there. Remember the word that we were looking at is metadidomi. We talked just now a little bit about Ruth and how aged that and how righteous Boaz was to make arrangements for the contractual transference of Elimelech's land, the widow, Naomi, into the kingdom. And, this is a prime example of a prayer that I always use. If I want something, I always pray this prayer. If it is your will, Lord Jesus, if it is your will, transfer that, whatever it is, into your kingdom. And I, will, you can state your IC number or your ID number or whatever, social security number or whatever, we'll manage it for you. And that's the very important aspect of the metadidomic genius, the ability to exercise faith and to take possession of what belongs to you. I mean, we're not asked to envy anybody else's property, but what belongs to you, you need to take it by force sometimes, or in the sense of the force of self-discipline. Take it by violence, in the sense of self-violence, that you have to do violence to your own sensibilities. And you have to say, Lord, if it is your will, I'm going to take over. What if you can transfer that into your kingdom? I will manage it for you. You need to do that I do that every once in a while. There's a kairos moment that came into the life of Boaz, and he needed to do that too, and said, Lord, if it is your will, transfer Ruth and Naomi and Elimelech and the land and all my duties as a kinsman redeemer into your kingdom. And I, Boaz, landowner in Bethlehem, whatever. Later on, he comes into the Messianic line in that sense because of the covering, the wings of refuge that he provided over this Moabite girl called Ruth. Okay, so that's really the picture of the metadidomi as an umbrella. Okay, a kind of a protective security blanket for the poor in the land. And then we have this figure, Jacob figure, Jacob, all right, he's called. And it has been pointed out that, the guy he starts out kind of like a schemer. In fact, his name means supplanter. And he cheats his brother, older brother, I think, out of the, inheritance, spiritual inheritance. I mean, he lies to his father. I mean, is it really that the father doesn't know who he is? Really? Okay, whatever. But he kind of has this reputation, right, as a slimy kind of a guy. And then he goes through a whole series of different experiences with his uncle Laban and so on and so forth. And then finally he's at Peniel and he's some say angel of or give up. They don't give up at all. And so they keep going. And so we've got a situation where Jacob is possibly seen as a proistemic genius. Okay. And he comes away from that battle. He comes away from that battle as, with a limp. He limps away from that battle, and it is remembered. He does have that memory in his muscle memory forever. So let's get the screen back on to the next fella, and that would be King David. Okay, so I think we were kicked out just for a moment there. Excuse me for the we'll get the screen back on for you in just a moment. The next and the final sort of archetype that we want to be looking at is this eleemosynary fellow by the name of King David, and we kind of know him because of the Psalms. We kind of know him because of the famous sort of Kairos moments that he went through. Okay, and David and Goliath, of course, and the whole story about Bathsheba and so on and so forth. So we call the eleemosynary the wild card candidate, right? So if you're playing poker or gin rummy or whatever in the old days, you know what a wild card is, right? In a pack of cards. It's the card that you don't play except for the big win. That's really, in sporting arena, you call this the MVP. This is the guy who doesn't know whether he's on the offense or the defense, and it doesn't make any difference. He's just rescuing the team. All right. And he's like a mad dog. He plays up front, he plays in the back or whatever. And that's really David as a shepherd boy, right from the very beginning, with his slingshot, and he kills the lions and the bears. Well, out of nowhere, he comes and he's sort of indignant. He's indignant against this giant sort of descendant from the land of the giants, Goliath figure, who's kind of like making a mockery of everybody, including King Saul. And so he goes up to Saul and he says, look, I'll take him on, right? And of course, he is smart enough to know that he can't move very fast with Saul's armor, and he's got his own way. He's devised his own tools. And he kind of invents the whole genre of the David and Goliath, the small guy, the underdog, who's able to meet the challenge, the huge, gigantic challenge. It's become a kind of a proverb, even in the secular world, about when they use the word David and Goliath. Okay, so here is a person who's kind of like the beating heart of Israel. He expresses, this standard. This is, Elias's, they mentor the standard, and they say things like, "How dare this person, this uncircumcised, Gentile, this uncircumcised person can insult the God of Israel," and so on and so forth. So he is sort of marching to the beat of a different drummer. And in that sense, he has his standard, he has his way. He's, he mentors the whole nation through this act, and he runs to the battle. Now, all the other brothers are hiding behind rocks, but this guy runs to the battle. He's a rescuer. He doesn't care. He's laying down his life for his friends. And that is sort of the reason why the Davidic ideal, when Messiah comes and everybody shouts out that, to Jesus, that you are the Son of David, that's the reason why. It's because of this bravery, courage, some would say stupidity, all right? But he's willing to lay down his rights. He's willing to lay down even his life. That is the wildcard candidate. That's the MVP of the biblical narratives, okay? Whenever you get people like this, they are, how shall we say, extremists. They are fundamental about their beliefs, all right? So when you look at the whole corpus of scripture, you will get, not just about among the men, but also among the women. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the stories. I don't know if we have time for all of them, but let's just maybe let's say that they all lived in the same. Let's say we could have a time machine, and they all were to gather together in one place at one time. Okay, so here's the challenge in discovery diagnostic. In the same way that we can look at the prophetic eye of this servant girl that was able to give instructions to Naaman, in the same way that we could look at Esther, for example, who was able to execute the plans of Mordecai to save the day. In the same way that you could see that Abigail was able to meet the needs, of the hour and negotiate a truce between her husband Nabal and King David. In the same way that Grandma Eunice in the New Testament could teach the next generation and impart to the next generation the essentials of the faith. In the same way that you had Deborah sitting under the palm tree. Palm is a symbol of governance, right? Oh, and of course, she was also put to test as well, not just to govern, but also to be put in a spot where she had to lead the forces of Israel, and Barak wouldn't go without her, actually. So she was kind of like the Ark of the Covenant in the flesh kind of thing, because Barak wouldn't go into battle without her. He saw her as a kind of like a holy of holy possession, right? A sort of a touchstone to the victory that he was going to win over Sisera. In the same way that Naomi was giving us sort of a covering over Ruth and aligning all the time, aligning her to her duties and the bigger picture which she eventually negotiated and with her and guided her and achieved the mission of winning back the property and of course marrying off Ruth to Boaz. In the same way that Rebecca was able to water the camels and perhaps even provide that comfort to Isaac in his grief over the death of his mother. All right, so in this same way, if you could get all these ladies together in one room, okay, in the same way that we can look on their lives, in that same manner, although you may not realize it, but you're actually making a statement when you show up at work or wherever it is that God sends you, right? In the marketplace or in the mission field or whatever, academia. Many people don't realize that they're actually making a difference. And when most people realize, it's too late already. It's really too late because, at your funeral, everybody will stand up and say nice things about you, and they'll all be true. In other words, they'll be giving you external validation. And I want you to think about this. In discovery diagnostics, the people who really know you, if you're younger, your parents are still alive, you can actually ask them, ask your mother, ask your father. You can actually ask your grandparents if they're still alive, or close relatives, siblings who know you very well, not just at church or in some capacity at work, but they know you as a person. Not your game face, because don't confuse this with your game face. I know that we work very hard for men. We work hard on our technology, on our armor, right? On extensions of ourselves. In the same way that the ladies do this as well in cosmetics and so on and so on. That's your game face, right? But remember, the iron is not the man. So if you were to gather around you, right, digitally, if you were to gather around you, your relatives, those who really know you, your parents and so on and so forth, who could give you external validation, kind of like holding up a mirror to you so that you can see yourself. I think this is going to be very useful. And you can use that today because you've got a smartphone, or even you can do this with a candy bar phone. It doesn't matter, right? Just send out a message, a short message to 15 or 20 of your friends, right? And ask them this question: how have I made a difference in your life? How have I impacted your life? Very short, and because it's a short message, they'll give you a short reply, right? So you can say something like this: I'm kind of attending a course on discover how God has wired me, and so on and so forth. Could you just spend a minute or two to answer this question? How have I impacted your life? Send them that text, and you will be surprised. Of course, some people will immediately know what to say because it's a short message, right? They're not making things up. They're not telling untruths about you. Now, of course, don't send this to your employees or something like that. I mean, they don't really know you, right? But send it to people it's just a small circle, your oikos group, the people who really, really know you. And you will be incredibly surprised to collate all your responses. Now, the reason why I say 10 or 15 or 20 people is because if you were to send this to 50 or 60 people, I'm telling you, the answers will start to repeat itself and it'll get a little bit boring. Okay, so just send it to 15, get 15 or 20 replies from, maybe you might send it to 30, 40 people. Well, only 15, 20 people reply you, right? Collate it together in an email or a single document, and then send it into my office. And we'll set up an appointment after you've done your autobiography, right? You've written out your sort of the different seasons of life and the moments of pivotal moments, flashpoints and freeze points and so on and so forth, right? You've done your self-authored biography. Here, this is a biography written by other people, but it's pieced together response by response, message by message, and put it together into a form. And we'll teach you how to interpret the data. This is really, we'll come together with your data that you have in your head, and we'll talk about in your one-to-one session. We'll show you how to triangulate your flow. That means how you've been wired, looking at your elemental person, your soul, how you've been created, from your mother's womb, and then looking at your impact, of course, depending on how much experience you've had and how many decades, 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, 5, 6, 7 decades that you've been living, then we're going to be able to, through the face-to-face, to determine where your, how you will make predict how you will make a difference going into perhaps the second half of your life. This, we call it, the whole process of this, we call it life impact coaching. So it's all about you, but you are not what it's all about. So that's the end of session 3. Thanks for your attention.